Good morning, and it really is a pleasure to be here today and to speak with Ed Zander in this community of customer success, because both Ed and I are very passionate about this topic. And Ed mentioned being old, which I don't really like to talk about, but one of the advantages of being a little older than many of you here is that we do have the benefit of some practical experience, which we would like to touch on. So Ed is currently Managing Director of Zander Capital Partners, where he invests in early stage technology companies. But he has had leadership roles in some very iconic companies. And in fact, Ed, you're pretty iconic yourself, actually. You can judge that after today. But Ed was involved in early computer companies such as Data General and Apollo, and then through to Sun Microsystems and Motorola, and most recently serving as a board director for Netsuite through its acquisition by Oracle. Now, a common thread in Ed's career is how he drove companies' success through a commitment to the customer, through putting the customer front and center, and often without the benefit of the great technologies that you have today. And in this regard, we're talking in terms of growth and value creation, billions, and in some instances, tens of billions, so big numbers. So, you know, as I sit here in Silicon Valley, we often talk about the first products, the best products. We talk about the first technology, the best technology. And as an investor and as an executive, I've seen, as has Ed, that too often go to market and the customer takes a back seat. And we believe that's really where the value creation is. So with that, Ed, I would like to start by talking about some of your specific views about customer success and how you personally might define it.
Well, first of all, pleasure to be here. I was walking around looking at some of the breakout sessions and saying, gosh, where was this conference 10, 20 years ago? I could have used it. In those days, we didn't have the technology nor the focus even as a conference on customer success. It was, you know, you just had to feel for the customer and do the right things, and I've got a lot of things I'll talk about and how we did it. But you know, it's funny, back in the day, and even today, in working with small companies, and even my experience more recently, you know, sometimes you get into companies with customer success, you start doing the surveys, and you say, are my customers happy? They feel good, and years ago, we decided that wasn't really the metric. The metric really was, were they paying us, and were they renewing, and were they giving us more purchase orders, and getting it down to revenue growth. And I hate to be that, you know, clinical about this thing, but clearly customer success has to be measured, and we did that in all of our companies very early on in terms of what were they buying and were they buying again. And there's a lot of things we did about that, but I'll talk some about that.
So one question I would like to raise with you, we have this obsession with winning accounts, winning customers, but not so much with keeping. Do you have a sense of how that's changing over time?
Yeah, I mean, I'll come to NetSuite later, but even at Sun, you know, we were getting new accounts, but clearly when we hit walls, and I've had a lot of war stories in each of those companies where we hit a wall. We found out that while we were getting new customers, we weren't either retaining or growing the existing customers, and that was really the focus in each of those instances. In fact, all of my companies that we began to, you know, to focus on in terms of growing the business.
Right, so I'm going to take Ed back to the mid-90s, which might seem a long way back for many of you, but it isn't that long ago. So at that time, Ed came out here to the Valley from the East Coast to work for Sun Microsystems. In fact, Sun sought Ed out. They had hit a bit of a wall in the early 90s, and then from 95 to 2000, their market cap grew from around 9 billion to almost 150 billion. And I think Ed had quite a lot to do with that. So they brought you were a marketer, you really understood the customer and sales. So what did you have to do to change and to bring in many of your philosophies into Sun?
Well, it was mine, but I'm going to give also credit to you know, Scott McNeely, who was the CEO at the time. And we, in the early 90s, we grew the company in the 90s from about $500 million, late 80s, to 18 billion at the end of the decade. And that's a hardware business or a systems business, which is a lot of revenue. But the early 90s, when we got into the server business, we hit some really significant challenges. Even though we had the great technology, and again, all of us start these companies in the Valley, and I do this every day with small companies about how great the product is, and so on and so forth. In those days, we had, Eric Schmidt used to work there as the CTO, and Bill Joy and Andy Bechtolsheim. We had Java, Solaris, Spark. We had the best servers. We were driving the internet effectively, internet growth. Yet we had a lot of customer dissatisfaction in our product, and our sales kind of stalled in the early 90s, a lot of concern. And we weren't sure why. We didn't know really what was going on, other than the sales force would tell us it was about the product, and engineering thought it was the sales force, and so on and so forth. So we began to do a couple of things. And again, if I had some of the technology today to understand what was really going on, it sure made it a lot easier. But there were a few things we did. We happened to get close to GE at the time, and GE was doing this thing, as you know, with Six Sigma and quality. And quality is another, customer success is another word for quality. It's customer satisfaction. And we took the technology from them and really adapted it for a high-tech, fast-moving, high-growth company. And the radical change we did was we started to figure out what were our customer dissatisfiers, what was really going on in each and every one of our customers. And this was really interesting. We gave every organization inside Sun, within 90 days, they had to come back with a quality plan or a customer success plan. Even human resources, finance, legal, the IT organization, because every one of them had customers. And whether our contract process was slower than the competition, whether it was finance that wasn't doing the credit check on time, whether we did have product issues. And we put together not just a checkbox quality plan, but a very metric-driven. There was no debating on what the dissatisfiers were. And we began to implement that in the early 90s. And second thing we did, which is we paid for performance. So we changed our comp plans at every director and VP. As much as 20% of our pay was based on all of us meeting our quote quality plans, which was our customer success plans. The other thing we did also, I remember at Sun, is organizational. The other thing was, how do you reduce the friction in the organization? And we always thought that organization was a means to the end. We used to say at corporate, if we could just manage everybody in a flat organization, it would be better. But how do we remove the barriers? So one of the things is paying for performance, that everybody, all the VPs and directors felt. The second thing is we moved people around. Myself, I was a marketing person, and one day Scott asked me to go run the software division, and then I became the hardware division, then I became chief operating officer. We moved finance people into field operations in terms of running some of the professional services organizations. And we gave all of our executives, if you look back in the early 90s, mid-90s at Sun, the rotation program for many of our executives was just amazing. Operations people into professional services or running a federal division and so on and so forth. So it got everybody focused on the customer. And lastly was the culture. If you worked at Sun, and maybe some people, you know people here, it was always, even though we had the great technology, every day we got up in the morning at work, every review we ever did was all about the customer. It was the first, second, third focus was the customer and how were they. So when we started to measure their success, were they renewing, were they buying more, what was the, what are the things in terms of making customers successful, and it just took off after that.
So this is a good time to transition a little bit, but I think some key points coming from Ed there is that in order to make customer success truly successful, it's not really about a function, it really needs to embrace the company. And I think that this morning Guy started off talking about that, and I think you'll hear some more about that, particularly with respect to Totango. But it's really the company embracing the customer which helps this change. So talking about making change, from Sun you went to Motorola. And this is at the time when Motorola had the very successful Razr, the flip phone, and precursor to all the iPhones, etc., that you have today. But we all love that phone. And yeah. Ed, you went there, and your goal was to really continue to sustain growth. So tell me about Motorola, because I think it's interesting talking about different companies with different cultures. And of course, there you had many products that were actually touching consumers.
Well, it was similar. That was difficult. It was the hardest job. We did grow the company largely due to the Razor, which we introduced after the first year I got there, from about 20 billion to 40 billion. When I got there, we had 90,000 people, and we had to restructure a lot of that because we had businesses that weren't producing.
And global businesses too.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, we're every country on the planet. But the real issue there was the culture, and I was warned about it from my friends in Silicon Valley before I got there. Didn't believe it, and believed it when I got there. And it wasn't the culture that they weren't, great people there. It was, and this is in running your companies or dealing with your customers. I can't underestimate the culture of a company in terms of driving customer success. You can do all the product you want, you can build the greatest things in the world, you can have the best people, but if you don't have a culture that is customer-centric, you're not going to get there. And Motorola, my God, if you go to the museum, you'll see the greatest product inventions for the last 50 years, televisions and radios and walkie-talkies and page writers and all kinds of things. And yet, when my first 6 months on the job, I went out and visited AT&T and Verizon and Comcast and T-Mobile and all the Vodafone over in all the Europe and Brazil and China, and I came back and I was just stunned. I stunned about the lack of customer focus, and our customers didn't like us. Now they were buying from us in some cases. You always
because
think
you had great products for a while, but
no, sticky or they were locked in.
Yeah.
If you were buying a set-top box.
Right.
Your Comcast, you're locked into that box. And yet, I couldn't believe it. And I came back and I talked to the team, and it just wasn't there. And we did a lot of then heavy lifting around. I took from Sun the quality stuff we did, the measurements, the metrics, we rotated people. Did a lot of bonus plans, which was a horrendous fight I had in terms of changing the bonus plan into rewarding customer satisfaction, customer success, and whatever. And we got it going, and I left after about 5 years there, and I'm never sure I ever really got to where I wanted to be in terms of a customer success-oriented company.
Do you think the access to the technology we have today, the data and so on, would have helped you convince on the culture, or do you think it was more deeply ingrained than that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, there is a culture that you don't need you just have to start every day with the customer. And what does that mean? It means sometimes, you do the surveys. Send a customer survey. I love United, after I get back a flight, they say, would you fly me again? Well, I have to fly again sometimes because when am I going to fly in certain routes?
Well, for me on United is if I can't find another airline,
right.
But never mind.
They don't ask the right questions. So yeah, you would get back customer surveys that say, oh, we bought, we're happy, and the division of the group would come back and show it to you. But if I had some of the technology today where you actually could dig down a lot deeper and measure, what they were doing with the product, what they're using all the features, what they're growing the business, as we get to Netsuite in a second, the whole idea of renewals, were they buying again, certain pieces of the product, it would have helped a lot. But in the case of Motorola, it was really hard because there wasn't a culture there that started every day with how we are making the customer more successful. But we made progress. We grew the business. We sold some businesses. But clearly, I think customers like Motorola would be very transparent, and other large companies that have stalled, and I can go down to what happened to Xerox and Kodak and a whole bunch of other companies, is this, all of a sudden they fall off. They think they have the customer. You bought from us for 5 years, you're going to buy another 5 years. And the lack of developing the kind of metrics, the kind of organizational discipline around the customer is lacking in some of these companies.
Look, I'd like to get to Netsuite, and I think it's interesting that we talk about the culture. And for those of you with early stage companies, I would encourage you to get the right culture from the start. And I do think the great positive about the technologies that we have now is that, to Ed's point, you get a better sense of what the customer is doing with your product, if they're using it, if they're not. And then you can do something about it ahead of time. When I was a salesperson, you'd have these 6 monthly annual check-ins. Oh, I need to call them or whatever. Well, by that time, they could well have chosen another product. So I think the great thing today is we're moving to real-time systems and real-time information. So let's talk about Netsuite. This is a business management platform, a SaaS company, and it really has a very interesting story, particularly in the time you were a director, where it grew rapidly and then had this amazing sale of almost $10 billion to Oracle. So can you talk specifically about what we're talking about as customer success at NetSuite? And I don't know whether you had a dedicated organization, because I think as we talk about customer success today, it's quite nascent. How is it organized? Where does it report? How does it fit with sales, major accounts, support, and so on? But how did you think about customer success in NetSuite?
Well, I was on the board in 2007 or 8 when I left Motorola, and we were about $100 million. And of course, as you know, at the end of 2016, we hit $1 billion in sales and sold to Oracle for about $9 billion, which was a great story.
I rounded up to 10. I think it was 9 point something.
It was 9 point something billion. Of SaaS business, organically grown for the most part. We did acquisitions, but they were of a variety of a lot of small companies, so there wasn't any big acquisition, which is really hard. I've come to, I didn't work for SaaS companies. I knew certainly a lot of SaaS companies, but being on the board of one and knowing how hard it is to get up that curve on revenue, you have to have customer success to grow your SaaS business. And at 100 million, we started to hit our walls. We didn't know what was going on. We were getting new customers, but our ability to grow those customers and retain those customers at the small business and medium business area, we had a lot of churn. We were just kind of, just trying to figure out what was going on. And being on the board, I remember a couple of meetings. First of all, we had to grow faster. We knew in a SaaS business to get the market cap we wanted, we had to get into those 30% ranges of constant growth on the top line. But more importantly, we began to figure out that we started off with our sales force, and we figured out that they were doing a lot of upselling, but nobody was responsible for renewals. And renewals in the SaaS business is a really key metric in terms of understanding whether your customers are basically like your product and are using your product and are using it in the right way. So we made a big change organizationally in terms of the comp plans. We took the salespeople that were on the upsells and gave them a renewal plan or targets. And if they didn't make 95% or it was 90% of last year's, then they had to go find it somewhere else. And all of a sudden, that put actually friction back in the company. Because the friction was the sales force started talking to the engineering and R&D and saying, we don't have this kind of features, these products aren't doing it. Yeah. It got the finance team, the legal team involved. We changed the comp plans for the company to measure the revenue based on this stuff, so everybody started working as a team. We did organizational changes there too. It was funny, being on the board, having the experience I did at Sun and Motorola, we moved, in fact, Jim as a CFO into the sales operations, and we moved some people into professional services and got the cross culture that we wanted to have. Before companies that are sitting here today, you're about to go see a demo here, we built a lot of our technology on top of the NetSuite platform, so we can measure what were they doing with our commerce product, what were they doing with our ERP product, so we began to get more insight into the actual. This was largely how we got into the enterprise. And this was the enterprise focus for NetSuite. We began to really look at these large customers and see what they were doing with each of our products. So, Zach, if he was here today, Zach Nelson would tell you the combination of really figuring out that it's all about renewals, changing our comp plans, getting the organization around that focus of what we had to go do, getting teams across the company. I don't believe I never believed in anywhere I worked of building a new organization that kind of, you got to really empower the current organizations on customer success.
The silos don't work. A siloed customer success organization doesn't work.
Well, for me it didn't. I mean, I don't know if it does. Certainly in all my experiences, we believed in small corporate and just architect and distribute throughout the company, this kind of stuff. And then
and pay.
Well, I will tell you one thing before we leave here. We're running out of time. Is if you can't measure it, don't bother it. You got to measure it. You got to be analytics. You got to understand everything you're doing. And if you can't show every employee what it means for customer success, not just happy words, you're not going to get there. So in all those companies I just talked about, including NetSuite, we could come into a meeting and really understand everything about the customer we needed to understand, and then get the right organization involved to fix it. And it's not just the product. The thing I learned a lot, even back in my Sun days, we had a lot of problems with customer contracts. We were taking too long. Legal was a a challenge. We also had finance. Human resources didn't want to do a quality plan until we told them that 20,000 people were their customers, the employees, and the employees weren't happy with what they were getting for HR. That was going to affect the rest of the company. So everybody in the company and I've ever worked, has a customer, and you got to really get that mindset around everybody that's working there about what they got to go do.
So, we've run out of time here. We're pretty much in between you and a demo where don't go yet, where we're hoping to see, a technology Totango platform that will really enable you to engage the whole company. But Ed, you're now working with a lot of early stage companies. As you really sort of go into these early stage companies and give advice, just give me a sentence or two about, what you say to them about how they should think about customers.
Well,
summarize what you said.
Like you do. I mean, sitting here in San Francisco, and I come up here a lot, I'll see a pitch, if I want to, a pitch a day. I mean, a deck a day, a slide deck, and you got a lot of bright people in this room. There are just so many bright ideas about disruptive technology and discontinuity in business models and the future, and we've seen them all. And I get the pitch, and usually the first thing is about how big the market is. Everybody's got a $100 billion market.
They're all the same.
Yeah, all the same. Yeah. And then they got great technology, and certainly I try to figure out whether they got that there in terms of its defensible first mover advantages. But when I get around to, besides the team, which is very important, I go right to the go-to-market. And it surprises sometimes the young people in the room, and I say, so first of all, tell me how you're selling this product. And second is, what's the output from the customer? What are they going to get out of this thing, and how do you measure whether you're succeeding with what you're doing here today? And it kind of is one of the challenges, I think, in a young startup, and something I try to get them to understand first. Take me backwards. Take me from the customer on back in terms of what you're trying to do here. And if I look at all my investments, and I do very early stage stuff, and I got some that did well, and I got a lot that haven't, and some in the middle. I really find the ones, besides having the great team and maybe the great idea, that figure out that go-to-market, figure out early on customer success, whatever you want to call it, in terms of getting that customer. We used to have an expression in Netsuite. Your products that you're developing, it's not nice to have, it's must have. You've got to build a company or build a go-to-market or build a product that customer that's buying that product feels they must have. Right. And if you can get to the must have, and the key word is must, I think you're going to find out that you're going to have customer success.
Right, with that, I think that's a great way to finish. And I'd like to thank you all for your time, and please stay and listen to and watch Ravi. I think it's going to be exciting. Thank you.